Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome Congressman Gene Green, the Dean of the Democratic delegation to Washington. He represents the 29th District of Texas. And David, I want to tell you that Gene Green has been in public office as long as I can remember.
Gene, do you want to admit to this?
Not before November the 2nd, I didn't want to. As we found out last year, it wasn't a good year to be an incumbent or a Democrat.
So how did you survive 2010, other than having perhaps a weak opponent? I don't know.
My opponent raised more money than any opponent I've had since 1996. He had run for office a number of times, knew how to run a campaign. We took him very seriously. We ran a full-blown campaign. We worked hard, did a lot of radio, a lot of ads, a lot of mail, ID'd our voters, and I had some good poll numbers, but I wasn't sure, but my poll actually came back exactly what we did.
So how close
almost 65%.
How close was your district? I don't believe I'm even asking this. How close is your district in with the same voter constituencies, I guess, as Sylvia Garcia, who lost?
Well, I have the good part of her precinct. I have the more Democratic part of Commissioner Garcia's precinct, and you know, I think you'll look at the numbers. Where she lost was a straight ticket voting, and you know, south of the Channel, Deer Park, all the way down to Clear Lake, and in that area. Sylvia is a friend and did a great job as county commissioner. I worked with her on so many different issues, and you know, I'm going to miss her. I still need to meet her replacement. But I understand Dave Walden is chief of staff, and I've known Dave for lots of years. So we'll sit down. I do parks programs, federal money for parks in the precinct, roads.
No earmarks, though.
Well, I don't mind saying I'll defend earmarks as long as they go to the folks that I represent. But and they're all for nonprofits. But we'll, you know, I'll get to know him, and hopefully we'll have some of the same values to deal with our co-constituents.
Well, Congressman Green, let's talk about it. In 2008, the Democrats were on top of the world in Washington. You controlled the Senate. You overwhelmingly controlled the House. Republicans, to be fair, were irrelevant. 2010, the House, the Democrats just get their butts kicked. I mean, there's a better way to describe it. How did this happen?
Well, in 2006, when we won the majority for the first time in 12 years, I told the then new speaker, I said, the American people jerked the Republicans' chain because they got too crazy. They will jerk our chain, too. Obviously, in 2008, it was another good Democratic year. Candidate Obama, now president, did a very good job and motivated people to vote. 2010, it was a combination. One, the Republicans were very motivated. And as Democrats, we didn't solve all the problems that we were hopefully we would. Obviously, when you have 9% plus unemployment, if you're an incumbent, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you're in trouble because 9% is overwhelming. We're used to having 4% in our area. And but nationwide, 9.5%, almost 10%. It's gone down a little bit, but still above 9%. Anybody that's an incumbent is going to be in trouble in a year where you have almost 10% of your folks who want to work out of work.
What did you do right, though? Because you voted for the health care bill. You voted, if I'm not mistaken, for Wall Street reform, and you voted for the stimulus. Now, that was supposed to have
I also voted for cap and trade, which was probably one of the worst votes. But
that's supposed, you know, those three votes.
Politically worst votes in my area.
So I guess my question is, since you survived, obviously, then you get to answer it this way. Did your colleagues not stand up, and were they not proud enough about their record? Is that what got them beat?
You know, to be successful as elected official, you have to do a lot of things right. And, you know, you never know which works, but you do everything. In our campaign in 2010, we worked hard. We spent a lot of money, did a lot of door-to-door, working people, IDing voters, a lot of publicity, talking about what we worked on. And health care in our district, I don't consider that a negative. Because we are compared in our district to Hidalgo County, one of the poorest counties in the country, of the number of people who work and do not have insurance through their employer. Now, I have a small group, not a small group necessarily, about 36% of the folks in our district who work get insurance through their employer. 43% who work do not. So the numbers were on my side. And that's what we fought. Wall Street reform never came up. In fact, in our district, because it's pretty populous, we probably didn't do enough of Wall Street. We didn't take anybody out and hang them who caused the economic problems we had in 2008. But I also think people are disenchanted with government in general, and particularly the federal government. because we didn't get a handle on the economy. There were efforts, the stimulus bill. I can give you a list. In fact, I have a newsletter showing the projects in Harris County that benefited from that recovery money. I just cut ribbon the other day in Baytown with Ted Poe on a flyover, about a $12 to $15 million project that was stimulus money. But again, that didn't resonate with the folks because we didn't see the unemployment rate going down.
And of course, Congressman Poe probably doesn't brag a lot about the stimulus bill, which he benefits from, does he?
Well, I'll let Ted take care of that. But we worked together on flooding problems, Port of Houston, you name it, a lot of issues. But and frankly, if the money was there, if we didn't get it, it would have gone to New York or Illinois.
Let's tell us a little bit about how the delegation operates, because you obviously have Republicans and Democrats from Texas. Do you all work together on issues of common concern for the state?
A lot. I guess the biggest example this last Congress was NASA. When the president's budget came out, it would devastate what we have at NASA and the Johnson Space Center. And again, that's bipartisan. Senator Hutchinson, who just announced she's not going to run for re-election, was so beneficial on the Senate side because we needed an advocate in the Senate to match what Senator Nelson from Florida was doing. You know, the president went to Florida. He made all these agreements with Florida. And our commitment was if there's a dime paid in Florida, then I want that dime to be paid in Texas too, for retraining of people and things like that. But on a delegation, John Colbert and I did an op-ed in the Chronicle together on how important NASA and Johnson Space Center was. The Chronicle sometimes doesn't put my op-eds in, but I think they were so shocked that John and I could come to an agreement on any issue. And so we worked together on those issues. Port of Houston, I have probably 90% of the port in our district. Ted Poe has some, Ron Paul has a little bit, but most of it. But believe me, across the board, Republican, Democrat, from literally Kevin Brady to Ron Paul, we work on Port of Houston issues because that's our economic lifeline here.
So you're saying, Gene Green, that it really doesn't matter who has the majority as far as our local economy is concerned, that everybody works together to improve this interest or that interest, and it doesn't really matter whether there's a Democratic majority or a Republican one?
Well, I think the difference is on local projects, we do work together. Like I said, the Port of Houston, the medical center, NASA, transportation, flooding, we all flood. You're Democrat or Republican. If you're having transportation problems, you sit in traffic like everyone else. But on the big issues, we would not have passed a health reform bill on the Republican majority. We didn't for 12 years when they were in control. We wouldn't have even tried to address carbon control with cap and trade. Now, as a member of the committee who worked on that legislation along with the health care, there's a way we can control carbon other than the cap and trade regimen, and hopefully we will do that. And frankly, nuclear and natural gas are part of the solution, not necessarily a European cap and trade, but that was all we were given. So the 4 years of Democratic control, there were lots of good things passed. And with President Obama signing it in 2009 and 10, we got a lot of things. Like I said, health care reform is a big issue. We've had problems since I was a kid in our district with health care because we couldn't afford it. And so that I'm glad we're in the law. And frankly, that's one of the big issues of the Republican majority now. They intend to repeal health care reform.
There's going to be a vote coming up soon?
Yeah, and it'll pass the House. In the House, we're a controlled democracy. Whoever has the majority sets the rules. And we set them for 4 years. They get to set them now. They set them for 12 years before that. And I will work with whoever's in the majority to represent our district. And, it's...
So, of course, you could have an amendment to the repeal of the health care bill, can't you?
Well, they won't let us have amendments to the bill. And in fact, their complaint of Democrats is we didn't give them open rules so they could amend it. And here, the first major bill we're going to have, they won't let us have amendments. So it'll be an up and down vote on whether to repeal. I don't think they get there. I don't think they can get 60 votes in the Senate. I know they can't get the president to sign a repeal. So...
Are they doing it, do you think, just as propaganda, just to please, and they're all winking at each other and you saying, Gene, we don't expect
I don't think they're winking at each other. I think they were all elected to repeal the health care bill. I don't think you could have survived a Republican primary last year if you had voted for the health reform bill. I would hope I couldn't survive a Democratic primary if I voted against it. So they're serious about it, but I don't think politically they can get there.
Okay, let's talk about... runaway government spending. Last time I checked, in the last 5 years, government spending is up by 42%. Obama is on track, assuming the budget doesn't get under control these last 2 years of his term, to be the biggest debt president in history, exceeding George W. Bush, of course, who had that distinction before. Is there some point where we reach the end game where we just cannot continue to pile debt upon debt on the federal government and expect that the currency, the dollar, to survive in international markets?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that we needed to get a handle on our debt even before President Obama was elected. When we saw what happened under President Bush, there was just no control over spending, not just for national security or border security or whatever, on everything. And I think that's come home to roost now. And so every dollar of the federal government needs to be scrutinized, whether it be the Department of Defense, and Secretary Gates is doing a good job on trying to get a handle on it. But along with every other federal program, we're going to have to look at it. I was a member in the late 90s when we actually had a balanced budget. Now, we had a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, but because we had PAYGO, which was if you wanted to increase funding, you came up with the money or cut it somewhere else. But that expired in 2003, along with any other budget restraint we had. So, but we had a balanced budget back in the late 90s, and I think we can get there again. We're deeper in the hole
you have a PAYGO now, too, don't you? But
well, we have a PAYGO statute, but my Republican colleagues have removed some of the rules that we put in on that. They call it pay and cut or something like that now. I don't know their slogan, but we're going to have to scrutinize, and it'll be with a Republican House, and I think you'll see a lot of Democrats who agree with that, because I voted for budgets in the late 90s with the intent that we support what we need to in our country, but we also get a handle on our runaway spending.
How shocked were you in that lame duck session, that this bill, this tax bill was presented to you, after, behind closed doors negotiations? Were you comforted in how it was presented to you? Or,
no, I voted no.
You voted against the tax bill?
I voted against the tax bill. They really lost me on when they talked about $250,000 a year being middle income. Not in our district. In fact, if I stood up at my town hall meetings and said $250,000 is middle income, I would have been laughed out of our ear. We don't have a wealthy district. In fact, there was an article in the Chronicle a couple of weeks ago showing the difference in median income in our district and John Culberson. And before that, it was Bill Archer. But so, those kind of taxes for those kind of folks just don't resonate a whole lot. The estate tax. I practiced law and did a lot of probate work in our district. I never had to file an estate tax return for folks in our district. And so estate tax reform doesn't resonate in our district very much.
How was that presented to you? I'm curious as to whether or not it was just a Biden-McConnell, Senator McConnell of Kentucky conversation, and do you think a lot of other things, including Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, was part of the tax bill?
It was presented to us without, I don't think the Speaker of the House at that time, I don't think Nancy Pelosi was part of it. I know Steny Hoyer wasn't. So it was mainly a Senate and the President agreement. And it passed the House.
Because they knew they could roll y'all.
Well,
right?
They didn't get me. Although I did like the extension on unemployment. Again, when you have over 9% unemployment in the country, in our district, we match typically the national numbers. Extension of unemployment was important, but wasn't important enough for the millionaires tax cut and all this kind of stuff. So we're living with it now. I'm glad it's over. It's passed, so it took away from the new Republican majority being able to pass that. But it also sets us on that added $1 trillion to the national debt.
Congressman, you obviously have been in office for a long time. You have regular town meetings, and of course, we're still shocked over the shooting of Congresswoman Gifford in Arizona at a town hall meeting and the deaths. I mean, and I'm sure you agree with me that the left-wing talk that somehow the harshness of political tone and debate has caused this and when the guy's a nut. But it adds another question. How can you have contact with your constituents and also remain safe?
Well, I mean, I was shocked. Gabby Gifford is a friend. I helped her when she first running. She was running in a Republican district in 2006. Congressman Colby was a more moderate Republican, if you have that in the Republican Party. And she won a tough district in 2006 and 2008 and won this year in a very close race. She's a good member of Congress, and I was just shocked because everybody loves her. assume because I have
That's for both
relatives in her
parties.
district.
I mean,
yeah.
Congressman Poach said wonderful things
Yeah,
about her. Says
and,
it works
and
with
so
her.
the person who did it, and again, as practicing law years ago, I did mental health work. And as we found out that people are mentally ill, some undiagnosed or even in denial from their families. But I agree with what the president said in Arizona. Let's get away from this who said and pointing fingers. Let's work together, no matter you have a D or an R by your name or an independent after your name. And that individual should have been caught earlier, but he wasn't. And so here we lost, so many people, a federal judge who everybody loved, and a 9-year-old child. That's talk about tragedy.
So are you going to change how you do your town hall meetings?
We've had some. In fact, we have a number scheduled for the next few weeks. I've never really thought about having law enforcement, except we did have security in 2009 because of the national effort to disrupt Democratic town hall meetings. But we weren't planning for it. But Sheriff Garcia actually called me on Saturday and said, Gene, I want to assign you a deputy. And he offered one, and I said, I don't think I need one, but we're doing town hall meetings, and I think for my own constituents' concern, I'd like to have some uniformed officers. So we have them, and we had uniformed officers there, deputies, both constables and sheriff, and we'll have HPD.
Well, you
not
said
for my security, but for my constituents, because more people, that Gabby's staff were killed, wounded. A lot of her constituents were killed. And
here's what I'd like to have a member of Congress tell me, and that is it just about the tone of debate, or is it not now a question of governing insofar as what weapons we allow people to have, and with what magazine strength and cartridges capabilities, such that 9-year-olds now are not going to be going to town meetings. Parents are not going to be taking them to town meetings. And the reason they're not is it's not going to be safe until and unless someone says something about the gun nuts who insist on not having the least little infringement on the so-called Second Amendment rights.
Well, obviously this person was mentally ill. He was undiagnosed. He was able to legally buy a gun and go through a background check that's in the law now. And, maybe we should have banned some other way, but I don't think gun control is the issue. Now, he didn't show up with an automatic AR-15 or an Uzi. He showed up with a handgun that you and I could go buy tomorrow and have our background check.
But the magazine would have been prohibited had Congress reinstated the Clinton restrictions on such things, right?
I think if you put all your apples on a magazine and not on the person, because the gun doesn't kill people, the person pulling that trigger does. And that's why I think you'll see more 9-year-olds. Last week I had a town hall meeting in the Aldine area. We had deputy sheriffs there. I had high school students from MacArthur High School. I had elementary school students that their parents brought, or grandparents in my case, brought. So I think our town hall meeting is going to be safe. We're going to have, we'll have more security. Again, not for the elected official or our staff, but for our own constituents, because I don't want to stop the interaction between our constituents, whether you agree with me or not. My joke is that my wife disagrees with me every day, and I'm used to that. So, but I don't want somebody coming in and screaming and carrying on, because that's not what a town hall meeting's about any more than the county commissioner's court or city council or school board meeting.
You're there to have an exchange of views. You want to hear what people think.
I want to hear from people.
Tone.
If you're mad, tell me you're mad, and I'll tell you where I got here on why I voted for or against a certain issue, and we'll have a difference of opinion. That's what America's about.
So you don't. So then you don't think the rhetoric has anything at all to do with the disruption of the Democratic Party? You said it. Somebody organized disruption of Democratic meetings. Who were those people? There were some of the same people who think they should be able to carry weapons to those meetings. So hasn't the fringe now inhabited a major political party in the United States?
Well, I have to admit, if you're very conservative, you're a Republican. If you're very liberal, you're a Democrat. My goal is to capture those folks that are in the middle and who believe the Second Amendment means something, and it does, that we have the right to protect ourselves and our country. And so I don't particularly want to restrict someone's ability to protect themselves. Yeah, now, I have to admit, I don't need a bazooka or a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, but I think we have the right to protect ourselves. The rhetoric has gotten worse. And it started in '09. If you know that I did town halls, and I've done them for 25 years, when I have typically 30 people at a town hall meeting, and all of a sudden I have 300 people from literally all over our metropolitan area who just come in and want to shout and shout down the elected official. And that's not what it's about. And so at that time we had to get a handle on how we conducted our meetings. And now this individual was not part of any fringe group that we know of. I don't even think he was a Republican or a Democrat. So, he was mentally ill. Now, whether he was focused on or listened to someone, nobody knows. But I don't think there's any evidence of that. I do think, though, whether it be Speaker Boehner or President Obama, that we need to also tone down the rhetoric. And I played football in Northside Houston. The joke was we not only went after the quarterback, but we threatened their families. You don't need to do that. We need to be on this playing field of what we're doing, of ideas, and not necessarily say that someone is such a bad person because they don't agree with me.
Yeah, you can have a civil discussion. Let's move to foreign policy. I know that's an area that you are very interested in. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is Iran's race to obtain nuclear weapons. I think Iran is a threat to our allies in the Middle East. It's a threat to the United States. It's a threat to our allies in Europe. Where are we going with this to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons?
Well, there are a lot of efforts, some more successful than others, with sanctions. And I've co-sponsored every bill that would upgrade the sanctions against Iran. They're a danger not just to Israel, the United States, or the Western Europe. They're a danger to the Arab Emirates. They're a danger to Saudi Arabia. They're a danger to all their neighbors because the system of government they have that's really, theocracy. And so that's the problem we have. And I want to use every peaceful way we can. In fact, we need to enforce the sanctions even more than we are. There's some evidence that came out a few months ago that even U.S. companies were knowingly selling things through middlemen to Iran. We need to enforce that. That's what we have a Treasury Department. That's why we have a Customs. We need to enforce that. If we expect Germany and China or Russia to be able, we need to do it with our own companies.
Who's a greater threat to the United States, though? The Iranians that Gary is referring to, or those people who are living on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, where we still have, 150,000 troops? So who's the greatest threat?
Our country has no shortage of enemies. Obviously, we're the great Satan still, and a lot in the Middle East, including the border areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. But there's some good news coming out of Afghanistan, but it's not, it's not as positive as all of us like, because we want to be through with it and bring our troops home. We still have a lot to do in Afghanistan, but we're seeing some improvement.
And so does Barack Obama have an easier time getting elected in 2012 if he is fully out of Afghanistan, or will there be such a disappointment within his base that he will be in trouble?
We have to see. I think he doesn't get reelected if all of a sudden we pull the troops out in 2011, the original date, and that's always been a very flexible date. We want to see what we're doing, because over Iraq, and I voted for the war in Iraq, one of my worst votes I think I made, because I was told that they had weapons of mass destruction by Condoleezza Rice, by the CIA, and they told this to both Democrats and Republicans. But Afghanistan is where 9/11 started. It started in Afghanistan under the Taliban, and now it's in the western part of Pakistan. Or in Afghanistan. So that's why we have a national interest to deal with Afghanistan, even though it's never been successful. The British couldn't do it. The Russians, obviously, on lots of occasions, couldn't control it. But somehow we have to get a handle on what's going on in Afghanistan, so we don't let them use that as a staging base again to attack our own country. But Iran is more of it's a country, and there's things we can do there, whether it's sanctions. But in all honesty, I think the Israelis are more concerned about it than us, and they have a right to be, because they're much closer to what Iran, and of course Iran hates the United States and Israel.
And the politics that David was talking about, you believe that Obama staying the course with the new way that he and Petraeus are going after the war will not impact him politically in 2012?
I think in the Democratic primary, there will be people who are disappointed we're not out of there. And I'm disappointed because I have a lot of my young men and women who are serving there. But I also know they want to do the job and get out, because they don't want to leave in 2011 and find out in 2012 we have a Taliban running the government, and all of a sudden we have national, jihad from Afghanistan. It's bad enough to have Iran.
We just have a few seconds. I have to ask you this rather peculiar question, but did you send a letter asking for leniency for your former leader, Tom DeLay? Did you
I
send
would
a letter
requested to ask for leniency. Tom and I have served together a long time before he became whip and majority leader in the late 90s, and I saw him change in the late 90s, and so that's probably why. And he and I had some difference of opinion starting about 99.
Gary, he got a letter from Netanyahu, but not from Gene Green.
Neither of them did him any good.
Thanks for being with us,
Yeah.
Gene.
I don't
We
know if
appreciate
mine
it.
would have helped either.
Thanks for being with us.
Oh,
We
glad
enjoyed
to
it.
be here.
We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Read about the guests. Watch a follow-up discussion with Gary if you must. Until next time, get informed and get active.
Click. Pick.